Can everybody hear me? Yes, yes, no, so awesome. Okay. Good evening and welcome. Welcome. Thank you guys for braving Houston traffic. I heard there were like 4 accidents and 84 areas of construction. We really appreciate everything you went through, and it's 100 degrees outside, so we really appreciate you braving the heat and the Houston traffic to get down here. I'll go ahead and do some quick introductions, and then I will get the ball rolling. But just to give you guys an idea of how tonight's going to go, we're going to have a quick conversation just really surrounding some of the issues facing Black entrepreneurship here in Texas. And then after we have that discussion, we'll open up the time for about maybe 10 minutes of Q&A, and then we'll close out for the evening. How was the food? Let me make sure. How was the food? It was good? Okay, all right. I can make sure next time we come here, we order all of that again. Okay, awesome. But I'll go ahead and do some quick introductions. Sitting on the far side of my right here, we have Mr. R.W. Bray. He is an awesome and phenomenal gentleman. I'm excited to hear the things he's going to be talking about later on this evening. Also, directly here to my right, we have Mr. Robert Woodson from the Woodson Center. And then, of course, directly to my left, we have Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, who is the director of the Booker T. Washington Initiative at Texas Public Policy Foundation. And I am your gracious host with the most. My name is Brad Trawick. I am the project coordinator for the Booker T. Washington Initiative. And apparently, I have really flat pants. As Alan, This is how millennials get dressed for the office. That's little, right? But I want to get the ball rolling because we do have a lot to discuss this evening. And so I'm going to ask the first question for Alan. This is the Booker T. Washington Initiative, and there's a very specific reason why it's called the Booker T. Washington Initiative. And so, Alan, I'd like for you to just talk very briefly about Booker T. and his connection to entrepreneurship in the Black community.
Well, it's great to be here, and I want to thank Texas Public Policy Foundation for taking this on. And, you know, today being Juneteenth, which was a day of emancipation right here in Texas, June 19th, 1865. But I think it's important that we also talk about another type of emancipation. That's economic emancipation, economic freedom and opportunities that come from that. And I believe that that's where we find some struggles out there. And when you look at Booker T. Washington, what he was charged to do in creating Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, he had a 3-pronged approach. He said it was education, entrepreneurship, and self-reliance. When you read his biography, Up From Slavery, you will see that, you know, the students at Tuskegee built Tuskegee. They learned how to make bricks. They built their own beds. They repaired the buildings. And why did they do that? Because he felt that it was important not just to have the book learning, as we say down south. I'm from Georgia originally. But it was important to have an industrial learning, because if you have an industrial learning, if you get productive skills, then you can go out and show that you are equal to someone else, that you can create your own business, that you have your own, visions. And I think that's why we're here today, is to talk about how do we reintroduce that, because we have to, back into the inner city communities, the Black communities. And I think, again, instead of folks, I think y'all saw what was happening on Capitol Hill, they were talking about reparations. Why are we looking back? Why are we trying to still have this slave mentality? We should be looking forward, and we should be talking about how do we build the next great generation of Black entrepreneurs and businesses.
Thank you. And Mr. Woodson, your organization, the Woodson Center, does a lot of work with nonprofits across the country, and a lot of that is aimed at economic revitalization in Black communities and urban communities. Can you tell us a little bit about that and kind of what that role looks like, and what does that look like on a national level?
Yeah, thank you for Texas Policy inviting me. But I'd like to just add a comment to what Alan was saying. What characterized Black life back in the day was the quality of the debate within that community. You had 3 strands early on. You had the insurrectionists in Nat Turner, you had the Marcus Garvey wing, recolonizationists, and then you had the Booker T. Washington. And we tolerated that, and the quality of that debate helped spur us where we are today. We need to reintroduce that today and be able to sit and debate without vilifying one another or cussing somebody out because they disagree. Because there's an old, George Bernard Shaw said, "Must a Christ die in torment in every age to save those who lack imagination?" what we're lacking today is imagination, ability to think outside of the box, and be really come to grips with this issue. So what we do at the Woodson Center, I started 36 years ago. I know I don't look that old, but
You just, well, you were 10 when you
yeah, very young.
You're right.
But it's because the Woodson Center, we go into the worst crime-ridden, drug-infested neighborhoods, and we don't go in here looking at excuses. The worst thing you can do to someone is give them a good excuse to fail. So if you say that 70% of the families in those communities are raising children that are not dropping out of school and jail on drugs, it means 30% are not. Nobody, left or right of center, goes into these neighborhoods and finds the social entrepreneurs, those that are raising children against the odds, the people who are resilient, because we're oriented to studying failure. And so what we do at the Woodson Center, we want to know how are people raising children successfully against the odds? And then what is it that explains their success and how they are the leaders of the future? They are the source of new information. Only 3% of the people in the economy are entrepreneurs. They generate 70% of the jobs. And they tend to be C students, not A students. A students come back to universities and teach, C students endow. And so as we look for solutions, what we do at the Woodson Center, we go in those low-income neighborhoods and we look for strengths, we look for capacity, we look for agency. And once we find it, we build on it and do what we do in the commercial, and that is we help them to raise capital. But we need to be, I'm going to be talking about, when you take this approach of always talking about solutions, and you can't possibly talk about victimization. And so I'm going to be spending, at our conferences, you are not allowed to get up and raise some problem for which you don't have a solution. We don't let you waste our time mowing about what somebody did to you 100 years ago. You know, the victimizer might have knocked you down, but it is the victim that has to get up. So I hope to spend some time talking about a getting up strategy in this environment and what we can do for ourselves. No one should do more for you than you're willing to do for yourself.
That was powerful. Thank you. Mr. Bray, I want to, real quick, I know right now, for anyone that doesn't know, Mr. Bray is the Southeast Regional Director for engagement for Senator Ted Cruz's office. And so with that in mind, I want to talk about, can you shed some light on the economic opportunity zones and kind of what that opportunity looks like for African-American businesses here in Texas?
Yeah, definitely. So let me first thank TPPF for even engaging in this matter, but I'll jump right into it. I think there has to be some type of answer for how we can elevate Black entrepreneurship, elevate Black enterprise. Obviously, for me, it's going to have several tranches. But one of those, for me, is making sure that we invest back in the community. For me, it's all a matter of community commerce. So one of the avenues that we can use, if we're talking about policy, is enterprise zones. Now, here's the amazing thing about enterprise zones. You take, for instance, you grab enterprise zones and you couple that with like a city like Houston, who happens to have TERSs, right? Now, we all familiar with enterprise zones because with enterprise zones, you get tax incentives, right, based on whatever you're creating in that particular area, right? The awesome thing about that is that now all of a sudden there's a reason for businesses to invest in that particular area, and there's also a reason for entrepreneurs to invest because of the tax incentives, right? So it might have been very costly before or prior, isn't so costly now. Now, let's say you had a red map, some type of heat map, right, where you placed the enterprise zone over a TERS in Houston. Here's the interesting dichotomy and where I think we need to go when it comes to entrepreneurship and growing enterprise. You see a lot of movement, let's use Houston, for example, in the Galleria area, right? Galleria area is booming with projects, right? They have all the projects they need. They also have so many projects, they have their own board. And this particular board can now issue bonds. I mean, you can basically put that area in debt if they wanted to. And no one in that area who's on that board is elected, but they still have that much power. and Galleria is growing. So let's say in the Galleria, for instance, that individual is paying $1,000 a year for their property taxes. You take a TERS in Griggs or MLK, and you're probably getting $50 from it, right? Well, where will the projects go? Will they go toward the individuals who are getting $1,000 a pop or $50 a pop? Obviously, you're going to go toward building in the Galleria. They're going to have more projects. They're going to have more construction, all the things that is needed to beautify an area, and that's why we're all traveling in the heat trying to get to the Galleria and shop. On the other hand, though, if you utilize that same concept and we start talking about enterprise zones on top of TERS where we can actually feed a community, you could actually go to a TERS in Griggs or MLK area, and we can make sure that we introduce policies that will even the playing field. Because you're only getting about 10% growth in a TERS. So whatever your growth is per TERS, right, give or take, you're going to get 10% growth. Well, 10% growth out of 50 isn't much. But if by any chance, right, you were to change regulations or change a policy to where there's a more percentage giving to an area like MLK or a struggling TERS, all of a sudden that rate changes, right? Well, you might have only gotten 50. Now you can probably get anywhere between 100 to 200 to 300, and therefore more projects will be given to beautify that particular area. So that can only happen if we're talking about policy rate change. And we're not talking about giving more money to that area. We're only talking about policy rate change. So if the rate changes in those minority areas, right, obviously their pool starts building. Now all the developers want to come because we've just given them incentive. Not only are they going to get the federal incentive, right, or the state incentive, through the enterprise zone, they also get the city incentive. And now more black entrepreneurs will be willing to not only create companies there, but employ more individuals. And I think we're going to get into that later. But my concept of enterprise zones and TERS mixed with opportunity zones all come from only one thing, and that is my commitment to engagement. And there's two important needs when you talk about engagement, and that's education and a commitment to enterprise.
Thank you. You mentioned something at the end of that statement right there, Mr. Bray, and I want to, Mr. Woods, I kind of want you to touch on that. When he talks about building community through entrepreneurship, I know in a lot of your work you've had the opportunity to visit a lot of different cities. Can you tell us what it looks like to build community through entrepreneurship?
Well, first of all, the reality is that any ethnic group's participation in the American economy depends upon their small business formation rates. A healthy community generates about 2.5 businesses per 1,000 people per year. In the black community and Hispanic community, the business formation rate is more like 3 per 100,000 per year. It was not always like that in the black community. The business formation rate in the black community in the 20s and 30s was higher than the business formation rate in the white community. And also what you were talking about is relationship of social capital to economic development. You cannot operate a business, you cannot build a facility in a community where there's civil unrest or violence and crime. So what we do at the Woodson Center, before a community can be revitalized, the character of it has to be restored. And there are elements in that community that if redirected, in other words, we take a small, if you have a community of 1,000 people, they're really controlled by 10%. And that 10%, if you can harness that 10%, so we go in and we find people who are ex-gang members, who are ex-drug dealers, but through God's grace they have been redeemed and transformed. And once their character changes, their characteristic has an economic advantage. Because if they go back in that community, their characteristic allows them to get respect. And they can operate a business in there without fear of being robbed. And so what we've got to do then is harness this social capital and marry it to people who know business so they can form a partnership. This happened with Father Ritter in Newark, when there was no supermarket within 5 miles because of the violence and people were fearful. But there was a drug restitution, a drug rehab program there, very effectively run, where people's lives have been transformed. And so the leader of it persuaded the head of Pathmark to build a new store and hire exclusively from this drug program. These were people whose lives have been redeemed and transformed through God's grace. When they began to operate the store, there was no pilferage. People felt safe, and people began to shop there. And so it ended up that when the Pathmark ran the numbers, that store was performing better than any of the stores in the white suburbs, because the character of the people working there had changed. And then you attach economic development opportunities to a changed community. Those are the ingredients of restoration. And my friend Pastor Soros in Somerset, New Jersey, over the last 20 years has taken that to a whole new level that we can talk about. So there is models. There are models out there. If we can just unchain ourselves from always focusing on victimization, and failure. You can learn nothing from studying failure except how to create it. And so I'm just make a case, and maybe we can discuss, going a little deeper about how that happens. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you. I hope everyone got with the blue sheets, the kind of infographic that's on your, that should have been on everyone's seats. If you didn't, we'll make sure you get one before you leave. And so the point of that, it really is to highlight some of the work that we're doing through the State of Black Texas report. And there is going to be a section purely on entrepreneurship, which is what our focus is for this evening. And one of the staggering kind of stats that I'll just relay to you guys that actually isn't on your sheet right now is that Black-owned businesses account for a little over 9% of all Texas firms here in Texas. However, when it comes to actual dollar amount of sales, Black-owned businesses in Texas only account for less than 0.5% of the total amount of sales revenue here in the state. And so, Lieutenant Colonel West, could you talk a little bit about some of the policy ideas that that we really talk about at TPPF and some other spaces that work to kind of elevate and change that number?
Well, I will agree with Bob Woodson. First and foremost, I always tell people either you're a victim or you're a victor. And we have to start talking about the victor mentality, especially in our inner cities. I grew up in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia. And if you all have ever been to Ebenezer Baptist Church, that was my neighborhood. And the thing was, my elementary school was located at the intersection of Boulevard and Auburn, right across from Ebenezer. And when you would walk home and you walk down, Sweet Auburn Avenue, what did you see? You saw Black-owned businesses. I mean, a lot of you ladies know about the Bronner brothers and all the hair products that they did, but you saw doctors' offices, you saw lawyers' offices, and things of this nature. And I think one of the most important things that helped us in that community was that we saw those examples. And the other thing was that, you could get a reference if you were studying hard and doing well in your school to go down and do what? Be an intern at one of these offices. So again, you're reinforcing the right type of positive behavior. You're showing, what being a victor looks like. And that's what we have to, once again, reintroduce into our communities. I think one of the most important policies we need to have in the education side, we need to have public and private partnerships. Because it is one thing to teach a kid Pythagorean theorem or some of these other things, and then they sit and say, so what? So what? That was one, I never get the time. I did a briefing for a general once, and I had a stellar briefing at the end. He said, so what? I was crushed, okay? but that's the whole point, okay? So we have kids sitting in classrooms, and they're saying, so what? But what if you had someone that could come in and back up that teacher and say, this is how you practically apply these theories that you're learning. And this is what I do, and I do this in this community, or close to this community. We had Citizens Trust Bank in Atlanta, Georgia, right off of Auburn Avenue. And so it was a great thing for young kids to, so you learn algebra and all this math and stuff, but then you can go down and get a time during the summer to have an internship at a bank and understand the importance of money. And we're not doing that. And so what ends up happening, since we don't have those type of relationships, is that kids gravitate toward the negative, and the drug dealer comes in and says, this is how you make money. This is what you can do. And that's that quick fix. That's that sugar high. So we have got to start, having those public-private partnerships in the education sphere. And another thing that we got to have, and Bob and I talked about as well, we got to rebuild a family. Okay? My dad never gave me an allowance. He gave me the lawnmower. Okay? And with the lawnmower, you went around to Miss So-and-so and Miss So, and you cut grass. and you earned your money. And guess what? Other guys were out there cutting grass too. So guess what you did? You learned how to edge, okay? Because it was all about free market competition and understanding. You know, if you were out there washing the car, hey, I'd clean your white walls and I'd armor all you inside. And so that's what we have to learn, and we have to start teaching that from the home. But too often we have broken homes that are producing broken souls. So it is about the education policies, about the family policies, it's about exactly what Bob said, the social capital, first and foremost. You're not just going to leap right in and start having all businesses pop up in our inner city communities. You got to start from the foundation, and the foundation's been broken.
May I just add a footnote to that?
Thank you, Bob.
This is really, I'm really create controversy now, because I think we've got to push the envelope, because our young people today are being poisoned with this nice notion that the conditions that you witness today, the black on black violence, we killed more blacks in 1 year than was lynched over the course of 80 years. And there are those who are telling those young people that that's a legacy of slavery and discrimination. It is a lie. If that were the case, between 1930 and 1940, when this nation was in a depression, unemployment rate was 24%. It was 40% in the black community. And we had, and segregation and racism was a rule of law. And yet, we had a highest marriage rate than any other group in the country. Elderly people could walk in their neighborhoods without fear of being mugged by their grandchildren. We had, at the time when we were denied opportunities to stay in hotels, we built our own. The Wallahaji in Atlanta, the St. Charles in Chicago, the St. Teresa in New York, the Calvert and the Carver Hotel in Overtown. We had the Hayti section of Durham, North Carolina, called the Black Wall Street. The median income for people in 1940 among blacks was exactly what it was for whites in the country. One last point that we need to focus on, this education gap. In 1920 to 1940, in the South, the education gap for whites was eighth grade education and 5 for blacks. In less than 20 years, that gap closed within 6 months, because we built 5,000 Rosenwald schools. And the blacks put up half of 4.8 million, and Rosenwald put in 4.6 million. And we sold chicken dinners and everything and helped ourselves. So it is important for our young people not to allow these myths about our solutions and be poisoned with belief that somehow our destiny and our future is determined with what white folks do. And so we must stop that and be willing to challenge it. Because if you don't believe that development is possible, or that your destiny is always determined by somebody outside of you, you'll never be motivated to take advantage of any opportunity yourself. And so that's important when we're talking about economic development, to emphasize that with facts, not just passionate, empty arguments.
And if I could back you up. You know, we were talking earlier about what happened at the commencement address at Morehouse College about a month ago, where the billionaire stood in front of the class and said, you know, I'm going to take care of all your student debt. I think that was one of the worst things that could have been done. Because what would have been better for him to stand up and say, I want your resumes, and I'm going to do everything I can to place each and every one of you in a quality job, and 5 or 10 of y'all are going to work for me. But instead, what did he do? He told them that you don't have responsibility. And he said, I'm going to take care of your debt. Now, what happens when they go out in life and they still think that they're a victim? And who's going to take care of my debt? Well, you know what? You shouldn't have gone out and bought the $80,000 Tesla car. You're not going to get a raise because you went out and bought a car. But that's a bad lesson that was taught at one of the best, finest institutions in the black community, Morehouse College.
Brad, you want to say something real quick? Yeah. So I'm going to just talk to you guys like we are a family reunion. So I do believe part of that. I believe that if we're talking about entrepreneurship, right, specifically black entrepreneurship, one way that he could have spun that is, if I do this, then you have to do it too. That if I do this, you have to make it your ambition to do it too. Ultimately, what would happen is that individual that is getting that debt paid would then have to join some type of organization, right? Some type of nonprofit movement, which would echo what you just mentioned, which is social entrepreneurship. The definition of that is there are three versions of entrepreneurship. One is business entrepreneurship, one is social entrepreneurship, and one is political. I'm hoping that Alan West is coming on the political side of it all, but I will say that for later, right? Hoping he can move some stuff. So, but let me digress real minute. Follow me for a second with this idea, right? If we were committed to black entrepreneurship, we would change not only face America, but we would change the world. Because all of a sudden, the idea of a black man or a black female that is growing up in America, if we set organizations that were hell-bent on making sure that we created entrepreneurships in those three areas, all of a sudden what you would see is a renaissance. I'll tell you how. We think about Wall Street, right? Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street only really happened, the failure of it was because a grocery store was burnt down. And that grocery store was actually made up of three men. It was actually made of three men. One was good at produce, one was good at money, and one knew how to run the system, right? They all got together, they did their thing, and all of a sudden they start beating out all the competition, which happened to be white. Well, one of the reasons why it fails is because they did not have political entrepreneurship. There wasn't enough political power in there. If they would have had an Allen West during Wall Street, this would never happen because they would have been covered. Another reason is they had good entrepreneurship when it comes to business, but they didn't have good social entrepreneurship that you mentioned because they were still building. And social entrepreneurship have a lot to do with community commerce. So let me just talk about this real briefly. I'm going to pass the mic to you. Let's consider this. There are 300 million Americans in America, right, in the U.S. It's 300 million. 12 to 13% of those are blacks. 7% of those 12 to 13% are actually foreign born. Think about that for a minute. 7% of those 12 to 13 are foreign born. That means we're only dealing with about 34 million red-blooded black Americans, right? That's it. Now let's just put hashtag Black Girl Power to aside for a minute, right? And say that half of them, right, half of those 34 is female. So that leaves us with, when we talk about black males, then we only deal with about 17 million black males that have to hold this torch up to carry America, black America, right, and start creating companies, jobs, and whatnot. But here's the crazy thing. 1 out of 3 of those are incarcerated or already have been incarcerated. So now the number is down. Now we're only dealing with 11 million. And if you think that that's the answer, right, that 11 million is going to be to carry the torch, they won't. Because the 1.9 million black men are actually have college degrees. The reason why that's so important is because 95.1% of entrepreneurs have college degrees. So the likelihood of there being a black entrepreneur with a 4-year degree is somewhere around 1.7 million. Now you would think that that would be good for us, but the sad thing is that half of them are under the age of 18. You guys are following me? So now, even if we're on a good day, we're talking about less than a million, somewhere around 800, 900 black Americans, and not to mention 130,000 of them are serving in the military. So when we talk about where we're going to go as far as the state of Texas, that means there are more opportunities in Texas than any other state in the union. Think about this. The state of Texas alone makes up 117 billion black dollars. That's 10% of the U.S. total. U.S. total is 1.2 trillion. 10% of that is coming straight out of Texas. That's black dollars. That's not going in the black community, which you so eloquently put. It's not going back to the community because we still have some rebranding to do. We still have to make sure we stick to these 3. And I hope we can go more into that. But that political power is going to be huge. An opportunity to making sure that we create business through enterprise zones and things the like is going to be also huge. And when it comes to social entrepreneurship, we had better start talking about redefining education and what educational success really is.
That's a great segue. It's almost like you saw my notes. We're gonna dovetail into into education very quickly because it's something that each of you touched on, and it keeps coming up. And even when you look at it here in Texas, at least 90% of all African American black business owners have at least some college education. So can you talk? Can any? And this is an open question. Can any of you speak to what can we do from a policy standpoint to make sure that there are more educational opportunities in the African American community, and then also redefining what education means, especially when you talk about leading to entrepreneurship?
Well, I think one of the things we already talked about is how do we create incentives for a lot of these businesses to go into the inner city, into these schools, and start to train them up on the practical application of things, and then provide those internships for them. And then also, you know, we have some of these larger businesses and corporations, you know, how do they start some of the suppliers to those businesses and corporations in the inner city community? So that's why I think it's so important that we incentivize folks to want to go in and do that, because let's be very honest, Texas is very successful. I think the 12th largest economy in the world. I mean, bigger economy than Canada and Russia. But if we continue to have a rotting, a cancer within the inner cities in Texas, we're never going to reach the full potential of this state. I mean, it's like an anchor. And so I think it's so important that we do that. And you know, that's why I think we should have less people on Medicaid, than forcing more people to be on Medicaid. Because what did that say? That means you're expanding the poverty rolls. We don't want to have more people having to go out and be on subsistence. So again, how do we get some of these big businesses and corporations to look inside? I think one of the great things you got right here, you got NASA, right here in Houston. What is NASA doing in some of these inner city middle schools and high schools to start talking about science and technology? We all saw that great movie, you know, with the young ladies and what they did. You know, was it something Minds? Hidden Figures. Okay, Hidden Figures. Yeah, you know, I'm not that smart, but Hidden Figures. Okay, so where are we producing the next generation of Hidden Figures? I mean, think about it. There's a reason why the Tuskegee Airmen were in Tuskegee. There's a reason why George Washington Carver did all of that in great and incredible agricultural experimentation in Tuskegee. So why are we doing the exact same thing now? Why don't we have major industries that are linked up with some of the many historical black colleges and universities, Prairie View, Texas Southern right here, and have partnerships with them that specifically train them to go into a certain industry? That's what we got to do. And I think it would be a great thing if, from a policy perspective, we incentivize those things to happen.
I think also we've got to give more power to parents to make better choices for their kids in education. The whole choice in voucher education did not come from white conservatives. It started with Polly Williams, a liberal black legislator in the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who came together with a number of others because of 500 kids who started kindergarten, only 10 made it to graduation of the public school system. So Polly Williams came together and said, we need choice. We need to start our own schools. They started black schools. They started their own schools, and they wanted the state to pay. And so the whole choice in education movement started in Milwaukee. We worked with Polly Williams and promoting it. And right now, we saw that low-income black parents, there's a big split in the black community on class lines. Lower income blacks support choice in education. Upper income blacks and political black leaders do not. So we are not monolithic on that, but no one gets. But in Florida, those black parents spoke. I believe that the black voters, I'm not interested in having them move from the Democratic side to the Republican side. I want them to move from the Democratic side to swing voters, so that both parties will have to compete for them by offering. The very fact that people slept this, DeSantis, who ran in Florida for the governor's race, he won by 32,000 votes. 100,000 came from low-income black parents who split their vote and voted for him, is because the black parents are the sleeping giant politically And if a candidate takes real issues about their children, the welfare, they're willing to vote. Obama and Oprah Winfrey came in to campaign for Gilliam. And these black parents expressed their independence by splitting their vote. And so that, to me, holds great promise. And again, that's, I think we need to encourage more thoughtful kind of votes like that and more thoughtful discussion about that.
So I kind of work off this premise that there are 5 like levels of engagement, right? One would be enterprise, what we talked about. Obviously, another is empowerment. When I talk about empowerment, I'm talking about political empowerment. There's entrepreneurship, there's enterprise, and there's environment. You notice that when we start talking about education, we start trying to redefine what that means and where we're going to go. So something we find ourselves even mentioning about Medicaid and what that means. Here's a significant thing in the state of Texas that I think we need to remember and why it's so important that we re-educate. One of the reasons why we need to re-educate, I think, in Texas, you take, for instance, I think someone was talking earlier about just how the mindset of the inner city is different than others. Agents, for example, right, which ultimately in Texas, we're talking about a small amount of population, somewhere around 4%, right? A little maybe over, a little 4.7, a little under 5%. What's amazing, though, if you look at the rolls of Texas, 155,000 businesses in Texas are owned by agents. 155,000. You look at blacks, we're a little over 150,000. So here you have 4% of the Texas population has more black-owned businesses than we do. Another fact that you're interested in fact is that agents employ other agents. Matter of fact, in the Census Bureau, it actually stated that blacks were interviewed, and most of them said that they actually employed other blacks. 41% said they would employ blacks even more, right? However, how is that any good if more than 90% of those black-owned businesses in Texas are sole proprietorships? They're not even hiring blacks because they can't, which is a different economy than Asians. So we start talking about re-educating. We have to start about re-educating people in the area of entrepreneurship and what it really means to lift a community out of poverty. And I think someone even mentioned not using our white counterparts as the benchmark. Because the truth is that whether we like it or not, white counterparts have gotten it for a long time. I really don't complain when people start talking about gated communities. I mean, we all in some way are discriminative. If I ever have kids, I'm going to be discriminative of where that person actually lives. I'll be discriminative of where they play. I'll be discriminative of what school they go to. I'll be discriminative of a lot of things. But at the end of the day, I want to make sure that that community is protected. And that's not outside the thinking. But what's powerful about the white counterparts is that they play within a 5-mile radius or less. How about 3-mile radius? They go to school in a 3-mile radius. They teach in a 3-mile radius. They shop in a 3-mile radius. And all of a sudden, that whole community is growing. Blacks can imitate that same thing. The sad thing, though, is that we have believed for a long time, because of miseducation, that for some reason, all of us have to go to school. The truth is that some of us can start our own businesses, and some of us can go to vocational training. And I'll say this and I'll end. One of the reasons why we need to start talking about breaking down this system is because we have a system now where we zone. And this is why I'm so hell-bent on political power, like getting you in office, is we zone blacks. And people don't understand what's happening. We're corralling blacks is what we're really doing. We treat them like animals. So what happens is, by default, a mother who gives Big Mama's address because that particular Big Mama stay in a better area, right? Better school, right? All of a sudden, that woman lies because she wants that kid of hers to have a better education. So we've, in fact, we've actually criminalized that person. And in one situation, there was a black woman in Houston who did that. They bust her kid back. They bust their kid back to the zone, kicked them out of school, and said, no, you got to go to that zone because you live in that particular area. To me, that's corralling. The local public school gets mad at local academies and charter schools because they offer what? Competition. So now there's this big argument about, the public schools are failing because the charter schools are challenging them, when in reality, no one has a monopoly over education. And I'm going to do whatever I can, especially if I'm being criminalized, to give my kid the best education possible. And so why not talk about black academies? And why not create social entrepreneurs who are willing to start those black academies, even if it sounds conservative?
Yeah, I want to follow up because you said corralling. One of the things I've always talked about is the 21st century economic plantation. That is what's being created. And the crop is not cotton like it used to be. The crop now is votes. Right. And that comes back to that political entrepreneurship that you're mentioning. But what I really want to hone in on is you were talking about the Asian community, and Bob and I, we were talking about this earlier. You know, ladies, all of a sudden, what popped up in a certain, you know exactly where I'm going. Y'all, see, you're already laughing. Nail spas. No matter where you go, the Asian community, they have a lock on that market. That's their niche. I mean, you know, and they all know each other. So why don't we have a niche market in the black community? I mean, y'all laughing, but it's the truth. I mean, and they are everywhere. They're in black communities, they're in white communities, they're everywhere. And you know y'all trust that Asian nail salon or that spa. And if you pick up and move, you're going to ask Miss Lee, you know, where should I go? And that's not being racist, folks. It's the truth, okay? But you're going to ask her, where should I go? But what are we doing in the black community that's a niche market?
Yeah.
Nothing. And that's what's so shameful about this is that we don't have those social, political, and business entrepreneurs to say, this is what we're going to create here, MLK. This is what we're going to create up in on the other side, south side of Trinity River. You know, one of the great things that happened up in Dallas, a place called Banton Farms, B-O-N-T-O-N. That area was called a food desert. There were no grocery stores. There was nothing. I mean, and this is an isolated community up there on the south side of Dallas. And someone had a vision. Why can't we just create an agricultural industry there in Banton? And they did. And they get people that have been released out of prison, and they're the ones that are growing all these. And now they have a grocery store that sells the produce that they're, you know, making there and they're raising. And now they have a restaurant that's selling healthy foods, because one of the big problems we have in the inner city community is that we're not really healthy. We're not eating healthy. But why don't we look and find out a niche entrepreneurship type of market that we can have in our communities?
Yeah, just again, a footnote to that. As I look at what is it that motivates people to become entrepreneurs, and I look at the Vietnamese community. What is it, the Bel Air? Is there a section, right, under a freeway, right? I think I remember. That was started not by there were two groups of Vietnamese who came here during the war. Those that were sponsored by families and those who are boat people. The people you see out there at that market are boat people. The ones that were sponsored and pampered did not become entrepreneurs. So struggle sometimes motivates people to become entrepreneurs. They lived 10 to a room, and then they came together, shared income, and worked hard, and built that facility out there. And there's one other benefit too, even if you have a sole proprietor business, and you can do this little test yourself. The sons and daughters of entrepreneurs, whether it's a hairdresser, a salon, or a barbershop, 60% of them go to college. There's something about a home of an entrepreneur that those entrepreneurs inspire their children to go to college. I've done this test several times over. I've been in a group of college-educated blacks, and I said, how many of your parents have some kind of business? 60% will raise their hands. And so I just think that any time that you can do anything to be self-sufficient, whether you're a sole proprietor, it's good. Because you do convey some very positive. Before I come to any community, I always find out how many black millionaires are from that community. And you have one around here. His name was Charlie Brown. Y'all ever heard of him? Brazilia County. It's below, I'm not writing, I was saying it right. In West Columbia, the man started, couldn't read or write, right? And he came up and bought 3,000 acres, and then sold it to the furniture maker, started a mill, started a church, and he ended up buying the plantation where his wife was a slave. There were 20 blacks that I found so far that were born slaves who died millionaires. Most of them couldn't read or write. If you want to Google somebody and have a good time there, Google Biddy Mason. Biddy Mason. She was born 1818 in Mississippi and had 3 daughters by her slave master and walked behind a wagon from Mississippi to Salt Lake City, delivering children and caring for her own children. And then he moved to California, and where she found out that that was a free state. And she started delivering babies, and at 10 years, she purchased land downtown Los Angeles and died a millionaire and started the AME church out there, was an entrepreneur, couldn't read or write. And so our children need to be inspired. There should be movies about her. There should be documentaries. We ought to be teaching this to our children. But the best, most popular book in Amazon for children in the socialist section is Communism for Kids. And that's the kind of craziness that we have to, but all of us should make a pledge to begin to communicate these positive messages to our children. I can't stop talking about it enough. I've researched it. I just love to read it. We ought to make it a joy to read about our success.
That's wow. That's very powerful, and I would want to continue this more. This has been a great discussion, but I did say that we would set aside like 15 minutes for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a time for questions. Let me go ahead and lay some ground rules real quick before I do that. The first thing, please make sure, and this is like kind of a long-standing rule for us, please make sure your question is actually a question. Okay. I understand. Yes. Pastor Davis, I'm sorry. But first and foremost, please make sure your question is a question. And then secondly, please wait for the mic and speak into the mic. While I'm sure we all can hear each other here in the room, we are live streaming this event. And so speaking into the microphone is the only way that our viewers on the live stream can actually hear you. So Nicole, I'll go ahead and I'll pick up the questions right here. I think it was that gentleman right there.
I couldn't wait. I heard you saying about finding a niche. Yeah, that's what we don't do. I've been in business 41 years, and I'm in a niche. I've been in the oil and gas business. All my clients, from Exxon on down. That is a niche. The number one money-making industry in the world, and the number one in Texas. Nothing come close to oil and gas. But we don't ever go that direction. We don't do it. And we talking about a niche. I was the only black JVA in 1978. That's when I started my business, and I'm still the only one. We just don't go that direction. It's been 41 years now. We don't talk about that. See, we talk about everything else except the number one moneymaker in Texas and the world. And we do need to do that. And the question is, when are we going to start? No. When are we going to start? Because, wait a minute. I taught for 15 years at the University of Houston. And 99% of my students were either white or foreigners, no blacks. Because we just don't ever have that conversation. You see what I'm saying? And we need to start at some point. I've been around in that business. As a matter of fact, I'm the only black I'm the only black person in that history book in the National Oil and Gas Museum.
Sir, you just blew my.
Go ahead. Come on.
Congratulations on all your accomplishments, by the way. Not just because you have done it in Texas, but it's good because we share the same Melanie, right? I hope that I answer your question because I think it can happen tomorrow. And here's why. Change typically happens when people start talking. And you're asking when is it going to happen? I think it needs to happen simultaneously from the top and the bottom. And what I mean by that is, I'm just going to push this out because I'm an unapologetic conservative. It's very hard to have a conversation when all of your weight is on one side of the table. If we go to D.C. and we're having a real sit down with blacks and whites and of different political backgrounds, 9 times out of 10, when it comes to the right side of the table, it's going to be majority white. Comes to the left side of the table, it's going to be majority black. And that's because we have a monolithic idea of what it means to be black in America when it comes to policy. And that's sad, because true political power comes when you can balance it out. And that's a benefit. You got white liberals doing some incredible things, but you don't never see those incredible things challenged by black conservatives because they're not at the table. So we got to have some commitment from conservatives to really be hell-bent in making sure we get black conservatives in office. The moment you have black conservatives in office, all of a sudden the balloon starts popping because the concept is no longer that people like West is a unicorn, right? All of a sudden these individuals are numbered, right? And it becomes a lot of them, and they have to answer. So on the lower end, you got to have people who can actually create the mechanism to help entrepreneurs. People like Crystal Victoria. So this woman, Crystal Victoria, has this like incredible entrepreneurship strategy, right? And she's been able to sell this strategy to universities, but she's not in any HBCUs. And that's because there's no political power to make sure that we are sponsoring these black-owned. This is a black female, by the way. The most growing demographic of entrepreneurs in America are black females, right? Hashtag Black Magic Power, whatever they call it these days. What is it, Black Girl Magic? Jesus, man. The women are blowing us away. So you got this huge influx of these black female entrepreneurs, but no one's talking about it on the ground level. So I think one of the powerful things is that we can balance the table where we have, like tomorrow, right, we have these individuals there. I'm committed to entrepreneurship, and I'm going to help these entrepreneurs do it, like organizations like which is a women entrepreneur initiative. You have those organizations, then you commit those organizations to answer to whoever the conservative leading blacks are. Those conservative leaning blacks, if the conservatives in America can make sure that they are sponsoring that, all of a sudden you have black elected officials who are setting an example who will then change the rhetoric and the language, and that way we can influence policy and where our black future will look like in the future.
Great job, gentlemen. Question for you. This is like the elephant in the room. We talk about black engagement. We talk about economic development. But a lot of us who are successful, we go out to the suburbs, myself included. I'm very guilty of it. But how about us moving back to the inner city and actually starting businesses in this inner city to get our tax dollars? Is that something that is part of the plan, or is that something that can public policy really happen without that component? So that's my question to you guys.
Well, that's why I'm a big supporter when Paul Ryan put in opportunity zones. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to attract private capital in those cities. And I'm working with about 5 community development leaders. Many of them are pastors, but who are no economic development, and they own land in that community. And so we are trying to work with them and bring them in partnership with private investors so that we can have models. See, we need models for what community economic development looks like. And if we want people to embrace conservative values, demonstrate that they improve the quality of the life of people, then people will vote you. They're not going to vote because you say you're conservative. And so I just think that we ought to, using the opportunity zone that Paul Ryan, when he was in leadership, and then go out and show people. Many of the people in these, we don't even know the opportunity zones exist. All of the investors do. So it's a job to help educate people and provide them with hands-on assistance. That's what the Woodson Center provides technical assistance to these inner city entrepreneurs and then introduces them to investors. So we sort of acted as the mediator to do that, but more of us have to do that.
I thank you for your question. I think here's how I feel. I'll go back to the community, right? I'll go back to the community when I'm able to connect with the community on all the levels necessary in order for me to gain equity. A lot of individuals leave the community because they're just not gaining any equity, right? It's falling apart. I believe the onus is upon us to make sure that when we return, or if we return, we make sure we invest first. Now, here's the crazy thing about investment. There are a gamut of individuals who have no problem investing in the third and the fifth and the fourth ward here in H-Town. They just don't happen to look like me. And the problem is because we're not educating enough individuals on the importance of community commerce. And so there will be more investors, there will be black investors like yourself who decide to move into the suburbs if you also commit to opportunity zones, enterprise zones, and the concept of TERZs. All those things are incentives. Here's one thing that I find very interesting. Ted Cruz is pushing this bill, right? And it's called the Education Freedom Act. And it's incredible because what it does is that it affords money to Fortune 500, 300, 400 companies who are willing to invest in minority education through scholarship granting organizations, as well as workforce. So when you start seeing a workforce, or the lack thereof, in the black community, it's because they're looking for jobs. Here's the incredible opportunity, though. Through this scholarship, not only can you make sure that blacks in that area get educated K through 12, but you also can start redefining what success is through vocational training. All the oil industry is struggling right now. You know what they were saying? The oil industry is saying that they are losing out because they need to rebrand. They have an aging workforce. Aging. They have an aging workforce. They have a workforce that lacks skill set, and they have poor branding. And that's because most of them don't have a diversity inclusive director. That's why. If they had a diversity inclusive director, part of their organization, going into the hood to make sure that they rebrand. See, it's not sexy to work on outside, right? It's not sexy to work in the oil industry. It's not attractive to labor. You make it attractive when you start talking about a pipe fitter is making $45 an hour out in Baytown, or you got this white cat who turned down the scholarship to climb a pole to be a lineman. He's making $80,000 a year and putting himself through college. Now that's redefining education. You can't blame that guy because of his skin color. No, he just gets it. And we start educating. We start saying, you know what? Let's create a vocational training organization right here in the hood. Now, all of a sudden, we have a reason to revitalize our area because you got 10, 12 guys who have trained vocational training, and they want to stay in that area. Now the business will come too, because the business is like, oh, there's a small little development over there. Let's build something, right? See if they will come. And they typically will. So I think as long as we do it like that, we take it from the political approach, and we start redefining education on the community level, we can do some great things.
Let me just make a commercial here. The Woodson Center, that's what we do. We're coming out with a book. It's called Lessons from the Least of These, where we articulate 10 principles that allows people to know where to look for these social entrepreneurs, how to look for them, and how to partner with them. And so we're going to be publishing that soon to guide communities about how to find, because there are people by the thousands, but the qualities that make these social entrepreneurs effective also makes them invisible, because they're not whining and complaining. They're just busy doing it. So you got to find them like a Geiger counter, because they're not looking for you. And so we'll be delighted to help you in any way we can to connect with people in your communities.
And then we're gonna have one last question and close it out because they're running up against the clock real quick, and right over there.
First, I represent the ladies here. Thank you so much for a phenomenal meeting today. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. You've hit so many points. I know it's about asking a question, but I'm going to make my statements because my father did find a niche. He found a niche in the grass business, in the sod, and he's an entrepreneur, and his daughter did get a college education, the first of his daughters, so that resonated well with me. And then as an entrepreneur myself, My children are the first in our family, both of them, to go to college and graduate. So that resonates. But I have 2 questions. The first one is, can we please have this again, but in my area, Fort Bend, Houston, please? And I will put it together, because I really want you to come out. They're not going to come to you, so I need you to come to us, please. And the second question is, Dr. Woodson, would you please be my mentor? We'll talk, but I would love for you to be my mentor. I'm putting you on blast. Okay.
I'll go ahead and answer that first question for you. Just to give you guys a little bit of background, this is kind of what we have at TPPF. We call these road shows, and we kind of have these panels all across Texas, and that's our plan. We're going to be kind of repeating the same format in Austin and in Dallas and San Antonio and some other cities as well. So we can most definitely do one in Fort Bend as well. I know that is quite a drive out there down Highway 6 or wherever, all the way out there. But we can definitely be more than happy to do one out there as well, and kind of repeat this discussion. And then also, just so you guys know, like I said, this is a part of a report called The State of Black Texas, which we will be releasing quite soon here, actually at the beginning of July. And so all the information that you guys are going to find here, what you guys see here in the infographic that was on your seat, and much more information is actually going to be on our website, at TPPF's website, at texaspolicy.com. And you just look for the Booker T. Washington Initiative, and all of this information will be available. But I think the last question was for Dr. Woodson. Did you want to? Was that a yes, no?
Oh, no, you already had your commercial. I want to pose this question to you as you're leaving out of here. When you talked about what can we do, there's an organization here in Houston called the National Urban League. From what I understand, they're having a big, fancy gala tonight. Do you think they're talking about this? Do you think they're talking about how we get chemical engineers, into our schools or niche markets or whatever? That's how you can start making a difference right now. Go down there and challenge these people that call themselves, quote unquote, leaders in our community. But I'm going to be very honest. They're nothing but the new overseers on the 21st century economic plantation. Now, it may hurt some people's feelings, me saying that. I don't really care, okay? The truth has to be told. And if you don't change the leadership in some of these organizations, like the National Urban League, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that will continue to happen each year, each year, each year. So I say go out and challenge them and ask them, what was your topic at your gala on Juneteenth? Was it about economic emancipation or reparations?
Awesome. And with that, thank you. With that, we will close out. I do want to say thank you once again to everybody for coming out. We really appreciate you coming out. Give yourselves a round of applause. Please do. And I'll just go ahead and repeat it. If you guys do want to find out more information about the Booker T. Washington Initiative, please go to our website at www.texaspolicy.com and look up the Booker T. Washington Initiative. And we'll be posting more information like this infographic that you have here in a wide sector of spaces: education, entrepreneurship, economics, criminal justice, and health outcomes as well. Thank you very much, and hope to see you guys again.
Hey.